What is Brexit?
You know, when the vote was announced, the result of the vote, I was really pretty shocked. Basically, I just feel that it's a step backwards. You know, we've been in the EU for more than 40 years now, and it's going to place us back where we were in the 1960s, basically.
Really?
Yeah. Obviously, some things have changed, but it's the kind of mentality that goes with it, which I kind of worry about particularly.
Why did this happen?
Well, if you take immigration, for example, there are actually no votes in a politician saying, well, actually we need immigrants to keep the country running. And so this is, Brexit is a sort of British independence movement. And it's sometimes characterised in those terms, you know, like a country which has been colonised and finally becoming independent, which is really sort of a completely ridiculous way to view it.
Is there a connection between Brexit and what we've seen happen and unfold in the Middle East recently?
I do see some parallels, particularly with this British government after the referendum. The government has become much more authoritarian in quite a lot of ways. And I think that's a result of the Brexit vote and the 2-year time limit for negotiating with the EU. What we're seeing is an attitude which is very similar to what we've seen in some of the Arab countries regarding the Arab League, which was their kind of hopes founded on the problem of national sovereignty. And again, we come back to borders, and you know, borders are not, you know, passports have not actually been in existence for that long. You know, even in Europe, you know, it's only sort of 200 years or so since some countries were unified into what they are today.
But people weren't traveling as much.
No, but you know, the original British passport was a letter from the King or Queen saying, you know, please allow this British subject to travel in your country.
Do you have one of those?
No, I don't have one of those now, no.
I would imagine you'd have to be 200-something years old.
You would do, yes. Yes. Yes.
But in all seriousness, your point being, borders may not necessarily deserve as much emphasis. And
I think that's right, because the more interdependent countries become, the less borders matter.
Are you surprised by all of this?
Well, I'm surprised by what's happening in the West. In the Arab world, I think I've been watching it for so long that I've rather got used to the way things are there. And you know, you see some hopeful signs, but change, if it's coming, is really pretty slow. Now, what we've seen both with Trump and in Britain with the Brexit referendum is a kind of backward movement. It's a kind of resistance to globalization, which again I think is rather futile. I don't think it's something you can resist because of the way the world works. Countries are becoming more and more interdependent, and so you can't just do whatever you want within your national boundaries. You know, the classic example is something like global warming, you know, where if all, you know, what you need is an agreement where all the countries make some contribution to reducing emissions and that sort of thing. And you can't really have one or two who decide that they don't care about it. We have on our doorstep a market which is pretty stable. You know, they're democratic countries, they respect human rights on the whole. I mean, not as perfect, but they're better than a lot of other countries. And, you know, it's a fairly secure market, basically, that we're turning our backs on for this kind of great adventure, supposedly. And the Prime Minister saying Britain is going to be open to the world. And then she rushes off to Riyadh or somewhere. And you know, the government has, ministers have made quite a lot of trips to the GCC states since the Brexit referendum, and they are very hopeful of getting a special trade deal there.
Would that be a way to soften the blow then of Brexit in terms of the inevitable economic consequences?
Well, yes, they're talking about. I think it's fairly clear that whatever happens in the negotiations, Britain is going to lose a certain amount of trade with the EU. So they're looking for ways to compensate. And obviously the Gulf states are wealthy, so they have plenty of money to spend. So try and get them to spend it with Britain.
What concerns you about that?
The sovereign wealth funds have gone on increasing the amount of property they own in Britain, and things like football clubs as well. And of course with Brexit, Britain planning to leave the EU, the British government has been pressing to develop relations even further with the Gulf Cooperation Council states. I think that's something we should really be very cautious about, because the opportunities for trade are mostly focused on sales of weapons, and the weapons trade is not something which is particularly sort of reliable in the long term. It has a sort of unpredictability factor which you don't get with, say, car manufacturing and things like that. And it's subject to politics as well, very much. What we've seen is that the British government has been making overtures to a lot of other countries for possible trade purposes, and China as well, without apparently being too concerned about the nature of the governments in those states. And also, you don't know how steady that relationship is going to be, because they can be, a relationship with a country like China is actually going to be more volatile than a relationship, say, with France or Italy. That's fairly obvious.